One of the great beauties of the global jazz rock movement of the 1970s was how it brought together musicians from vastly different backgrounds. Such was the case of American trumpeter Doug Lucas, who migrated to Europe in the late 1960s and in 1975 recorded an album in Brussels with Belgian jazz players. And from the album Niara, the title track. Already we've got kind of some psychedelic sounds going on, acidy tones, against like a half step up and down, duh, E flat, F, F, E, like that. Hear that kind of mellotron-like tone in the background, giving kind of a shiny effect amidst all the more like staccato instrumentation that's going on. Let's see, that must be a fuzz, or that must be some kind of effect on the bass. I guess that. Keyboards on this album are played by Frank what Wuyts or something. I recognize that name. During the 1980s, he did some collaborative stuff with. Well, he was involved in Aksak Mobile, I believe, on the second album. And then during the 1980s, he teamed with Henry Cow woodwind player Jeff Lee, Lindsay Cooper's predecessor in that band. And they did a collaborative album in 1988 on the No Man's Land label. Yeah. That mellotron-like tone is just so rich and just lighting up the background of this piece. I find it hard to believe that there's no guitar on this, but I just don't see one credited. But those little snaky tones that I'm hearing kind of, heck, it could be a mixture of like bass and maybe a bit of clavinet or something with some effects pedal applied, but huh. Yeah, I gotta say that Douglas Lucas has quite a fluid tone on this. The drummer on this is Bruno Castellucci, who also produced the album, and I like how he's laying out these hi-hat beats, and then every so often throwing in these fills. Or going into these open cadence drumming passages like right here. has a real airy feel to it all, with all these like open cadences and just Douglas Lucas's trumpet just billowing right through it all, and while the drummer, Bruno, throws in like these kind of loose rhythms, and then these alternating with fills. And then we get these more frantic passages with like choppier, like some of the musicians playing in closed cadence. Our drummer guy, Bruno Castellucci, he played in Peter, that name, Peter Herbolzheimer, rhythm combination and brass. I recognize that name like crazy. I've rated like 5 of his albums, but I've never actually pronounced it out loud or tried to pronounce it out loud. Yeah, did a bunch of like big band jazz funk albums on the MPS label, MPS BASF, like the European jazz, the most prolific labels in like European jazz and jazz funk of the 70s. And he was also in Solus Lacus. Yeah, that 1975 Belgian jazz rock album by Solus Lacus. And so this guy has gotten around. Another Straight Six. That was much later. And Douglas Lucas, what else did he do? But this was like his only album really as a band leader from the time that I'm aware of. Oh, he had another like Belgian. He had a Belgian only release 2 years later called Chiaroscuro. Oh, I'm gonna murder some of these pronunciations if I even try. He played in the SSO Orchestra, and they were like a jazz funk band that put out a couple of disco jazz funk albums in the 70s. Although I wonder if he returned to the United States for that. Let's see trying to ascertain whether those albums were. I always assumed that those were American, like disco funk albums, those SSO records, but they may just be European. Anyway, back to the song. Hear that one keyboard that's like wiggling up, scaling up amid the that kind of skanky, that kind of wah wah sound of like the bass and that shimmering like mellotron sound. We've got some real layers going on. Not to mention the drummers just adding accents all over the place. And I guess this is all Frank Wuyts, who was also, aside from the stuff that I just told you about, he was also in the Canterbury band Pazop that recorded released a single in 1972 and recorded an album that year that was ultimately released 35 years later on Musea under the title Psychillus of a Lunatic Genius. Yeah, great album. Very much in the vein of the Moving Gelatin Plates or Super Sister. I must give a shout out to the bassist Yvan De Souter, who, what did he do? He was in Placebo, interesting. I'm impressed. Yeah, Placebo put out 3 really good kind of loungy jazz funk albums during the early 1970s. Ball of Eyes, 1973, and a self-titled album. That band also had Mark Moulin in it, who would go on to put out a seminal solo album in 1975, Sam Suffy, which has been become a rare groove classic. He was in the formative lineup of Aksak Mobile. Oh, he produced the first Mark Hollander and Aksak Mobile album. Although I don't know if he was really in the band, and I think he was also involved in Koss, which Mark Hollander was also orbiting around that time. I think Mark Hollander was briefly a member of Koss. Yeah, they put maybe on their second album, and then he was also involved in this chamber group with a really long name. Then he went into he was involved. Oh, okay. Mark Moulin was involved in the second and third Koss albums. Yeah, Viva, Boma, and Babel. And then he formed Telex, the synth pop trio, who put out a couple of really great albums at the turn of the 80s. Neurovision being a must-have in that genre. Yeah. Wow, that was the track Niara from the album of the same name by American trumpeter Doug Lucas, recorded in Brussels, Belgium, with local, like, Belgian jazz funk musicians. Let's see, what else did, aside from the 2 SSO albums of the mid-70s and a second album released only more locally, Douglas Lucas, let's see, played on albums by Justin James and the JJ Band, played on an album by a band named Plus. Let's see, later in the 80s, Victor Laszlo, Fra Fra Sound. I can't say I know much of these off the top of my head. In 1972, he had involvement on at least one track on an album by the Shakakas. That was funk, psychedelic soul funk album from Benelux that has become a rare groove classic. And back to the very accomplished Frank Wuyts. He has some very colorful credits, aside from the ones that I've mentioned, like the second Aksak Mobile album. He was on the Gravity album by Fred Frith, plays on the track Come Across. He was played on the 1977 eponymous album by Belgian jazz rock band Son House, and has played on records by Hegelen, Victor Laszlo. In the late 80s, turned up in the Sophistopop act Vea con Dios. And yeah, it was on the album, collaborated with Jeff Lee on the album From Here to Drums, released on No Man's Land in 1988. So quite a colorful career he's led. For more Rubies and Sapphires from the Doug Lucas album Niara, see the directory of albums by American jazz funk artists, linked in the description below. And for Rubies and Sapphires from some of the Belgian albums that I ended up names dropping, since this was recorded in Brussels with Belgian jazz musicians, see the directory of albums by Benelux artists. And like and subscribe, And follow me on social media to know when the next video is coming out. And leave a comment on anything that you noticed, that any point that I may have missed that you would like to add. Maybe you were able to pinpoint some of the instrumental sounds more accurately. After all, the credits that I was able to find were quite vague. They just said keyboard. They didn't say make or model. They didn't say whether that was a mellotron or not. They didn't say whether that other sound I was playing out was a clavinet or a fuzz bass. Maybe your call is better than mine. And anyway, until next time, this is Zaragon, the world's most ear travel trimaximalist, signing off.